So I was starting to get just a little bit burnt out on always covering VTuber news, more specifically the fact that it's always negative and it's also very, very time sensitive. So I wanted to take a break from the news content that I usually make and do one or two video essay type of videos. Something that will hopefully be a little bit more evergreen. And I found my inspiration while scrolling Reddit, and I saw this like year-old post where someone was asking what the hell happened to Idol Corporation's Hebrew branch. And it turns out I'm actually exceptionally qualified to talk about exactly this because I've been following Idol Corp from the very beginning. So first we have to talk about the first generation of Idol. Now the original CEO and founder of the company is Aviel Bassett, and he wanted to start a VTuber corporation that specifically caters to markets that nobody else is tapping into. I remember when the company initially founded, I looked at his founding statement. He was talking about trying to start a VTuber wave in basically every language aside from English, Japanese, and Indonesian, which have overwhelmingly dominated the VTuber space. And being from Israel himself, he found 5 Israeli VTuber talents. And he named this branch Idol HE because they all speak Hebrew. I remember watching the original debuts of Katarina Cutie, Nikki Rei, Lily Sin, Neo Sparkles, Emi Suika, and honestly, I was immediately entranced. In fact, I was specifically entranced by Lily Sin.
Yes!
And Neo Sparkles.
Oh no, child. Oh no. Wait, I thought I won. Okay, oops.
Who I thought were just overwhelmingly charming and funny. I felt Lily had some absolute gremlin vibes. I thought Neo was adorable. But really, shortly after debut, you had 2 talents really take off, and that was Katarina and Nikki. They kind of took the lead in terms of viewership, and one by one, the other 3 talents slowly started to drop out. And it's not really a secret or too hard to figure out why these talents ended up graduating. If you take a look at their subscriber count and their views on their videos, just shy of 12,000 subscribers for a corporate talent who is giving a large chunk of their revenue to a management team, that's really just not sustainable at all. As someone with just under 5,000 subscribers, I can tell you with confidence there's no universe in which someone with 12,000 subscribers is making a livable wage. Even if she was making triple what I'm making and didn't have a manager taking a chunk of her revenue, you'd still probably need to work a full-time job in the background, which is really going to cut into the time that you have available to stream. And if you take a look at the 2 remaining Hebrew-speaking talents, you can tell why they stayed. With 40 and nearly 30,000 subscribers, that's really the absolute bare minimum channel size that is even remotely sustainable. And I have to imagine the only thing that makes a channel that size sustainable when you have a management team that's taking a portion of your revenue is probably the fact that they live in Israel. And it is almost universally true that the US dollar, which is what the majority of the English-speaking audience is going to be paying you in, just carries a lot more heft in the international market. You can see it's worth over 3 shekels. And I say that because it probably won't be much of a surprise to learn that these 2 talents, the only 2 talents to survive from the Hebrew generation, are the ones who spoke the best English and engaged the most with their EN fanbase. And it seems Aviel learned from the mistakes of his Hebrew branch and immediately debuted his English branch as soon as he had the ability to. And later he went about rolling in his 2 English-speaking Hebrew talents and making them part of Idol EN, just because economically that makes the most sense. And I'm almost positive that if you've heard of Idol Corp at all, you probably know them best specifically for their 2 most successful English-speaking talents, Rin Penrose and Yuko Yurei, 2 of the funniest, most engaging content creators I've seen in this space in a very long time.
I didn't think you'd actually do it! That's going in my spank bank, Pippa. You know that, right? It's going in my Pink Rabbit archives.
You're kind of deranged.
You're fucking telling me that?
You're
I'm
fucking
deranged?
deranged.
And the fact that they were able to achieve so much greater success than their predecessors, I think, at least in part, goes to show that it really is the English-speaking market that is making the big bucks in the VTuber scene. And I feel like the almost perfect metaphor for how much more powerful the EN market is to any other secondary language market is Kureiji Ali's rant when she was being criticized from her Indonesian fan base for speaking mostly English instead of her native Indonesian. And she was getting complaints from her Indonesian fan base saying that they don't speak English, or at least not as fluently as they speak Indonesian. And it was during this rant that she pointed out that in Indonesian elementary school, the students start learning English.
Gimana ya, lu pernah SD nggak sih? Sesusah apa sih bahasa Inggris? Kalau kalian nggak ngerti bahasa Jepang ya Uli ngerti, karena Uli juga gak bisa ngerti kalau bahasa Jepang mah. Tapi kalau bahasa Inggris kan masih bisa diraba-raba artinya. Sebenarnya kalian itu bukannya gak bisa, kalian itu males aja.
And implied that basically if you can't speak English as an Indonesian, you must have failed elementary school. And whether you agree with that sentiment or not, it is overwhelmingly true that for the most part, English has become an international language. Most other countries, whether we're talking about Israel, whether we're talking about Indonesia, whether we're talking about the Philippines, whether we're talking about Japan, so many other countries also know English. So focusing on that language group is just overwhelmingly a smart business move. You will not be surprised to hear that following the smash hit success of the English branch, Idol went ahead and released a second English generation as quickly as it made sense to do so. And even though, as you can see by the fact that it says subscribed on all of them, I think they are all overwhelmingly worth your time. I think they're extremely funny and talented people. As you can tell by these subscriber counts, it's really hard to capture that lightning in a bottle. 50, 60, 70,000 subscribers are decent numbers for an indie VTuber, but generally when we're thinking of the Shoujo, Hololive, Nijisanji, these are organizations that are basically able to instantaneously gift their talents hundreds of thousands of subscribers right out of the gate. But as a much smaller company, Idol just wasn't able to take off quite as well as it wanted to, and that's going to become relevant later. And you will notice this redacted Idol here, and I'll get back to that in just a moment. But for right now, I just want to focus on the generations themselves. After two moderately successful English generations, Aviel finally debuted what the internet has been craving for a long time, and that is a Spanish-speaking corporate VTuber branch. And I remember all the way back at the beginning, years before this generation debuted, Aviel spoke multiple times about wanting to tap into the Spanish market. So I am genuinely happy that he was finally able to fulfill on that idea that he had from the very beginning. And I really do wish that more companies would cater to the Spanish-speaking market, because when you consider how many people speak Spanish all across Central and South America, that's a pretty sizable market to tap into. And not only am I happy that he was able to finally debut a Spanish-speaking generation, he even had one breakout success in the form of Meika, his third and only other talent to crack 100,000 subscribers, and he did it with the Spanish-speaking branch, and props to him for that. And of course, props to the talent themselves. And then the last generation was Idol Encore. And this is a music-focused group, and everyone on this list is someone who was previously an independent talent, allowing them to carry over their existing fan base to the company, in exchange for the company, of course, investing resources in them to promote them and their content and help produce their music. So now that we've covered all the waves, let's take a specific look at Riro Ron, the reimagining and re-debut of a previously existing talent, Kyoresu. Now, Kyoresu is actually relatively well known, and they made a bunch of quote lowly covers of popular songs.
When I popped off, then your girl gave me just a little bit of lockjaw. Baby so cold, he from the north, he from the Canada.
However, about 4 years ago, they started to drastically reduce the amount of music videos they put out, and when you look at their output 2 years ago, they only released 3 videos for the entire year. So when Kyoresu re-debuted as Riro Ron, a lot of people were stoked because it was kind of a revival of a previously mostly defunct talent that hadn't been putting out a ton of content. And as you can see by this tweet here, Riro's time with Idol was extremely short, and it was full of accusations. As this person says, the Riro Ron VTuber situation is so crazy. Fucking fans IRL, doing hardcore drugs on stream, the true rockstar life.
Pulling up the top of the lot, going buck 12 buck swat, busting all the bells on the backs. I just hit the link with the backs.
And of course, we have probably one of the most famous screenshots in Idol Corp history, and this was her invitation to join the Riro harem. If you've ever heard people talk about Idol and reference a quote, silly pill, they're referring to the Riro Ron situation, where she said she was going to take a silly pill on stream, which a lot of people originally interpreted that she was going to be taking some sort of hardcore drugs, but she later clarified and insisted that she was just talking about a sleeping pill. Part of what made this situation even more explosive than it otherwise would have been is that Idol Corp put out a statement about Riro that a lot of people feel absolutely threw her under the bus. Normally when an agency terminates a talent, they'll give very vague reasons like creative differences or they broke company policy or something relatively vague that tries to avoid putting both the company and the talent in a bad light. But according to the termination notice, they accused Riro of misusing controlled substances, the quote-unquote silly pill, soliciting fans during livestream members content. This is of course in reference to the harem she said she was going to be building, meeting a fan in person and accepting gifts from said fan in the total value of thousands of dollars, and conducting a secretive relationship with a member of the Idol management team who has also been terminated upon confirmation of these details. Now, what lends a little bit of credibility to that last bit is the fact that Idol did actually go ahead and terminate one of their staff members immediately after releasing this statement. Normally you expect a corporation to blame everything on the talent but defend their own management team. So the fact that they were actually willing to terminate one of their own employees caused a lot of people to lend a lot of credibility to this termination notice and assume Riro was guilty of everything. People went as far as to compare this situation to a real-life NTR corruption doujinshi. The part of the fan base that believes all of these allegations is actually went as far as to thank Idol for being transparent about this situation, because normally we don't get much insight into these terminations, so a lot of people saw this as an act of transparency. But there were, of course, people who didn't buy Idol's statement and said that they didn't provide any proof, but in a rather surprising twist, a good chunk of the people reacting to this, instead of not believing the allegations or believing the allegations and assuming Riro was the bad guy, I've never seen so many more people call a VTuber base than I did while going through the comments on this termination. For everyone calling the situation crazy or disastrous, you had at least 2 comments saying that Riro was a fucking rock star. I don't think I've ever seen a termination where everyone believes the allegations against the talent and then likes them more. Bizarre. I've never seen that happen anywhere else. Now, Kyoresu stated on their personal account, which people were very publicly aware was directly linked to the persona of Riro Ron. She said she was shocked to see the notice, she said there was an insane amount of speculation, and that she couldn't clarify anything because she signed an NDA. And luckily for the talent, after returning to streaming, she's been doing relatively well for herself. Her debut stream got over 100,000 views, which is crazy. And with over 500,000 subscribers, I think we can all agree the talent is sitting pretty. And despite the fact that this was a pretty public and messy fiasco, in a bizarre twist, it didn't seem to damage anyone's reputation. The overwhelming consensus was that Kyoresu was guilty, and those were all valid things to be terminated over, which meant that Idol Corp didn't get into nearly as much hot water as you would typically expect. But the fanbase also agreed that all of those actions were based as hell, meaning that Kyoresu didn't lose her fanbase, and in fact is actively thriving. This is truly a one-of-a-kind situation that people are going to remember as part of VTuber history until this hobby fades out into obscurity. And of course we can't talk about Idol EN without discussing Pochi Wanmaru. Now I won't go into as much detail as I originally did in the full video I made covering this situation. As you can see from these two thumbnails, Pochi got into a little bit of hot water, but I will briefly summarize. Pochi Wanmaru did a donathon, and part of her donathon is that for all the different tiers of donations she received, she was gonna fulfill certain goals. However, shortly after collecting all that money, she decided that she needed to take a vacation because she was going to move. She was changing countries. And as she was taking a vacation and changing countries, Idol Corp withheld the $40,000 of revenue that she earned during her donathon. And I think in 99.9% of circumstances, the overwhelming majority of people would be fully against Idol and fully on the side of Pochi. A corporation not paying their talent for money that they earned through their content is normally pretty black and white, pretty cut and dry. The corporation is in the wrong. But what's interesting is there were a lot of fans of Pochi who contributed a tremendous amount of money only for her to basically immediately leave before fulfilling all of her donathon goals. Which it's not to say that she never would have, but a surprisingly large amount of the community felt like she was just gonna take the money and run. Not only were people complaining that she hadn't fulfilled her donathon goals after a month or two, people even accused her of being a menhera. It's worth mentioning that shortly after all of this unfolded, Pochi did eventually end up graduating. And what's interesting is that even other VTuber news agencies aside from myself put a somewhat positive spin on this graduation. And what this means is, yet again, something dramatic and controversial is happening in Idol Corp, yet the company themselves isn't having its reputation tarnished by this drama. And you'll notice that's a pretty consistent pattern with Idol Corp. After drama after drama after drama, it's genuinely unusual to see a VTuber corporation with this many public controversies and still have such a large portion of the fan base on their side. And I think that really just goes to show that people were really pulling for Idol to be successful. And all of the times they did something controversial, there was enough plausible deniability that it didn't end up collapsing the company in the same way it did with many other small VTuber corporations. Now to circle back around to Idol EN Gen 1, the foundational generation that catapulted the company into the success that it would later enjoy, we can't do that without talking about Yuko Yurei. Easily one of Idol Corp's most popular talents, and among one of my favorites by a wide margin.
What did they read?
They procreate.
They use Procreate? Yeah, it's a great drama.
No, they have sex, Fuyo.
And as you can see, for the most part, she was a pretty typical streamer, doing the typical video game live streamer gambit, but just doing it while also being adorable and a bit of a gremlin. And then you'll notice she does a "Would You Date Me" live stream.
I like how you say you also have ADHD. Like you just do I don't know if I have ADHD. I haven't gone to like a diagnoser. I have something. What the fuck does that mean? I have something.
And also POV, you're on a date with a VTuber live stream.
Am I awkward? Am I awkward? How are you doing? Are you nervous? I'm not nervous.
Now, when looking at her page right now, this might not seem to take up a huge amount of her content, but what you may or may not be aware of is that a lot of these ASMR videos and these dating roleplay videos have actually been removed from her channel retroactively. At one point she came out with a statement to her fans saying that she didn't enjoy the parasocial aspect of being a content creator, and she was starting to get a flood of like unicorns and obsessive fans and a lot of comments that made her uncomfortable. And here's the thing, a lot of the content that she deleted that was ASMR related was her members only content. Even people who didn't participate in her girlfriend experience live streams didn't support the way she removed paid content out of the blue like this. And I'm not going to read all of these statements or read these statements in full, but a lot of the people who enjoyed her roleplay and girlfriend experience content were very attached to it, and they felt discarded and abandoned with this sudden pivot. They felt like Yuko wasn't respecting how they felt about the situation. Now, even though myself and many others fully support a talent to take their content in whatever direction they so please, the truth is, 4 months after she decided to no longer do the sort of parasocial girlfriend experience content, she announced her graduation. The simple fact is that she stopped catering to her most profitable portion of her fan base, and between the backlash and the sudden dip in attention and revenue, it just didn't make sense for her to continue streaming. Now, even though this was a major talking point in the community for a long time, and Idol lost one of its biggest talents, Idol truly kept trucking along for quite some time. And despite having yet another well-known talent leave the company, Idol was still relatively well-respected and well-liked, and that is largely because of the work of one Rin Penrose. You see, Rin Penrose didn't blow up with girlfriend experience content, she blew up with YouTube shorts, and she blew up in a big way. And some of her most popular videos, and definitely my personal favorite type of videos, are the videos where she's talking about management. Specifically the fact that she displayed this air of rebelliousness, like, oh, she can barely be contained by management.
I'm going to bed, and there's nothing that you or the policy can do to stop me. See if your company policy can touch my slightly flawed but still okay sleep schedule. Pikmin emoji, ZZZ emoji, and then they just say, I'm gonna give you to a different manager so fast, I swear to God. I like to imagine it's kind of an act of, like, they draw sticks, and whoever has the shortest stick gets Rin Penrose as a talent to manage one-on-one. How are you not fired? What are they gonna do? Fire me? Talent seconds away from being fired. Oh boy. Oh no. So that's kind of my rapport, my back and forth with the poor unfortunate soul tasked with dealing with me.
Don't let my manager see this. CEO Aviel regrets hiring me. And I think the fact that Rin constantly portrayed management as being completely unable to stay on top of her kind of gave the impression that Rin and a lot of the talents had a lot of freedom. And that because she is saying things we typically don't see from corporate VTubers, you know, most corporate VTubers don't go around publicly making fun of and teasing the CEO, it kind of gave the impression that Idol was a good company to work for that offered their talents a lot of freedom that you just can't get anywhere else. And I think that did a lot to prop up the company's reputation. But just as things started to cool down, Idol seemingly being invincible to their past controversies, their talents doing better than ever, the facade of Idol started to crack. But right as it seemed like Idol was on top of the world and nothing could slow them down, we got this message where one of the freelancers who worked for Idol Corp made an expose document which had a lot of criticisms, but the main one was the fact that payments were delayed and recently she hadn't been paid at all. And this created a sort of wave of other artists complaining about late or non-existent payments. Mind you, this is a company that had a tremendous amount of good press. They advertised that they had a better revenue split with their talents than most other companies. They advertised that they had famous legal YouTuber Legal Mindset update their contracts. They promoted themselves as transparent and honest, and a lot of that goodwill basically evaporated overnight. And unfortunately, this was truly a sign of things to come. Now, Idol Corp did eventually apologize and pay their artists, with Rin even doing damage control and going out of her way to offer a direct line of communication if they had any unresolved issues concerning payment. And although I do think those were the correct responses, they were the correct things to do, the simple fact is not being able to pay the people who work for you on time is a red flag. Not necessarily that the people who work there are bad people, but more so the fact that the people who work at this company might be having money troubles. Because here's the thing, debuting 5 talents and having none of them crack 100,000 subscribers and not be able to massively contribute to the company financially. Following that up with an English generation, which really only had 2 talents crack 100,000, only to have one of them graduate. Bringing on an existing famous talent, only to shortly thereafter terminate them, and having their EN second gen, their music generation, their Spanish generation, all just not reach these sky-high limits that you pray for when you're running a VTuber agency. The problem is there's just not enough money coming in, and all of these generations and all of their management needs, plus the comparatively generous revenue split with the talents, means you're just not taking in as much money as you're spending. Now, one thing that's worth mentioning as we're talking about how Idol is overextended financially, it's worth mentioning that Idol had a pre-existing partnership with a company called Brave Group. Now, Brave Group is a relatively large company with a good number of sub-companies underneath them, all the way from Riot Music to VSPO and many companies in between. So once it got to the point where Idol Corp could just no longer financially sustain themselves, it was almost inevitable that their existing partner Brave Group would come and bail them out. And in an unprecedented move that usually only happens if a company is collapsing and can't enforce their contracts anyway, when Brave Group purchased Idol Corp, purchased their talents, purchased the branding, and effectively made Idol Corp just one of many sub-companies under their umbrella of companies, they allowed multiple talents to leave and keep their branding, keep their channel, keep basically everything. When a talent leaves Hololive or Niji Sanji, typically either they have to have enough drama surrounding them and their departure that when they return to being an indie, a large portion of their fan base knows who they are and has motivation to follow them to their indie persona, or they have to get adopted by an agency like VShojo, which has the marketing budget to let everybody know, hey, your favorite Oshi is over here now, go watch them over here. So to release these contracts and let these content creators keep everything while the company itself is still running is unheard of. And when Brave Group offered to release them from their contracts, Katarina Cutie, Fuyo Cloverfield, Juna Unagi, Rin Penrose, and Meika all decided to leave. And it's worth mentioning that of the talents that decided to leave, Rin and Meika, the only 2 remaining talents with over 100,000 subscribers, are included in that list of talents that chose to leave. So just to review, they only ever had 3 talents crack 100,000. One of them graduated while Idol was still under Aviel Basen, and the other 2 graduated as soon as they were purchased by Brave Group. So when Brave Group bought Idol and allowed everyone to leave, they're buying a company that only has small talents. And it takes a massive company with a lot of power to invest in those talents to be able to afford to do something like that. And with Katarina Cutie leaving, the only member of the original Idol generation to actually stick around with Idol all the way to the very end is Nikki Rei. Nikki has been loyal to this company since her debut in 2022. And I just want to say, it takes an incredible amount of determination and willpower to spend 2 years working with this company, starting out with little to no attention in a VTuber company nobody had ever heard of. The entire branch that you were a part of collapsing, forcing you to be rolled in to a branch that speaks an entirely different language, and now being rolled into an entirely different company. Even though Idol is most famous for the extremely talented, the one and only Rin Penrose, I would implore you to show just a little bit of love to the founding member of this company who's been working her ass off for 2 years and doesn't have nearly as much to show for it as she deserves.
Come back! Mom! Move! No!
Hold on! No! You put this here!
Move! Move! No!
I guess.
Cause you're amazing, just the way you are.
And at the very end of it all, Idol Corp CEO Aviel Basen has also left the company. I think there are definitely things that he can be criticized for. He can be criticized for not paying his freelancers, that's fair. You can say that the way he handled the Riro Ron termination was messy, threw the talent under the bus, and used the fact that she was under NDA to completely prevent her from speaking out and speaking her side of the story. Spend a minute to think about how other VTuber corporations handle problems in this space. Think about Wactor and how terribly they treated their talents. Think about Niji Sanji and how the fact that they are so poorly managed and how terribly they treat their talents has become such a meme, it has its own subreddit dedicated to clowning on it. Being a talent management agency is hard, and it is expensive, and most people who try fail. So even though he did not succeed, I still remember when I first followed Idol. I remember those first few tweets that were so hopeful about being a company that treats their talents well, about being a company that pays their talents well, about giving people a chance to succeed even when they're from countries that people otherwise don't associate with VTubing. I remember being hopeful that things could change in this industry. An industry which I have spent the past several years professionally criticizing. This channel for the past several years has been a VTuber news channel. I know in depth all of the ups and downs that come with being a part of this space. But despite basically being a professional hater in this space, I think it's important to remember that the reason any of us are here is because of the talented people that we otherwise wouldn't have been able to interact with if it weren't for this community, this culture, and the businesses in it. And at the end of the day, all I care about is what's best for those talented people. Thank you for watching.